Welcome back. On the bench, we are looking at a customer-owned Fender, what I believe from the serial code is a 1953 Fender Pro, which is a very cool amp. And this is something that the customer is bought specifically to sell, got a good deal on, and along with some other stuff, and has the intention of getting this checked out to then sell to somebody else. And unfortunately, there is some stuff that was done to this amp in the past that's going to bring the cost down on that. We're going to take a look. This is going to kind of stand as an example of, if you ever do get your hands on one of these, some things that are okay and a lot of things that you shouldn't do. So we're going to dive in a little closer and take a look. All right, so we're going to pull the chassis in a second here, but you can probably already see that there's been quite a bit of work done to this amp already. It's had all the capacitors, with the exception of this one, changed out. Most of the resistors also. And here's the really bad part. Somebody replaced that power transformer there and either didn't get the right one or this was done unrelated. But man, they really brought the value of this amp down just by doing this, by cutting into that chassis there. The actual work in here is not such a bad thing, especially if you keep the original parts. If you ever are restoring or working on an old amp like this, you know, it's not a bad thing to keep it functional. It's kind of depends on what the customer wants. If they want a museum piece, that's one thing. If they want a functional amp that they're going to try to play as much as possible, there's nothing wrong with replacing filter caps, leaky caps. A lot of the old Astron caps in these amps from this era, people think have a lot of mojo in them or stuff like that, but man, they are just leaking a ton of DC and running your amp hot, and that causes it to sound really good, but it'll kill your tubes and take down other components. So it's the same as the Eddie Van Halen method of just running your tubes at 80 or 90% dissipation, and then having it sound great, and then having a bunch of backup amps on stage. And maybe that's just a rumor, I don't know. But filter caps, leaky DC, film caps, or even resistors in here that need to be changed out because they're not functional. That's all. It's like changing the oil on your car or your tires. It has to be done even on a vintage thing if you want to keep it functional. And again, that's if that's what you need. So I'm not complaining about any of this in terms of the components. Now the work leaves a little to be desired. You can see like this cap is just tacked on in there. There's some other things that are not done quite right. Same there. These are just tacked on to the old legs. That's not going to hold up forever. It's not necessarily bad, but if somebody's going to be gigging this amp, that's not good. But the big thing is the chew up of this chassis. And then also, maybe this is unclear, but once again, we have a grommet, the strain relief that's doing nothing for our power cable in terms of strain relief, so that's dangerous. Now, since the customer is going to be selling this amp, really all we're doing is a safety check on this. He wants minimal work done, just enough to make sure that it's safe and operable to then sell to whoever else is going to want it. He's trying to keep his costs low, so I'm going to find the compromise between doing enough work to make sure it is safe to hand off to somebody else, but then also give a list of recommendations of, if you were to buy this amp, here are the next things that I would recommend getting done on it. I'm going to open up the chassis here and see, or I guess pull the chassis and get in a little closer and see if there's anything else But we're definitely going to be replacing this 3-prong cable, or at least strain relief in it. So we've got the chassis. We've got the chassis out of the enclosure. And while these do look like replacement transformers, they also do look like they're from other Fender amps of a later era. The funny thing with these transformer codes, so we have the EIA 606, and then that first digit after that tells us the ones digit of the year, but then it's not more specific than that. The other 2 digits are the week. So this would be a 0 for, could be 60, could be 70 from this era. And then this guy, we've got a 606, it's a little hard to see, 109. So the 1 could indicate that this is a 61 or a 71, and then the 9th week of that year. Whereas this is a 60 or a 70, 30th week of that year. And you're usually able to tell by context of the rest of the amp, but it looks like these have been dropped in from a different, if I were to guess, I would say these are from a 1971 and a 1970 Fender. If anybody else has other insight on that, feel free to let me know. I'm not sure why they would have been swapped out, unless somebody pulled the transformers, used this as a donor for another amp, but then somehow decided to swap these in. So we're going to start by making sure the strain relief is actually working correctly, or maybe even just replacing that cable, because that's not good for our power cord, and then making sure it's properly strain relieved, and then we'll check out the rest of the amp to see what other safety needs it may have before going back to the customer. So I've powered this guy up, given it a test. Everything actually seems pretty good, and it sounds pretty clear, stable, noise-free. One thing that we need to do, I've already clipped the old power cord out to be replaced. It had some, we can see the hole there where that power cable goes through. The strain relief had come loose, and it actually had worn away at the power cable, which is really the last thing we want on something like this. That's one of the few things that can really cause a pretty big catastrophic failure for your power cable. So this needs a new power cable and strain relief. Now, this is going to take a little hunting down, because with a circular style there, we can't use one of our Heiko typical strain reliefs. Let's see, I've got one nearby. This is an oversized one, but something like this is normally what's in a Fender style, and it's kind of a ovaloid D shape. So that's not going to work. We need something circular, so I'm leaning towards just putting a rubber grommet in there, not necessarily for the strain relief, and then using one of these C-clamps. Maybe give that a try, but I'm going to also see if we can get something else in there, find something. I know they make strain reliefs. They're sold through like Mouser and places like that for weatherproofing enclosure, so we may just go that route. Otherwise, I'm going to consult with the customer. He may want to just do that work himself. He's a guitar tech and can handle that kind of stuff. So waiting to hear back from him. The other stuff that I would do, let's say this was my amp, I was going to gig it. I really wanted a nice, solid, playable, reliable amp. I probably would replace these kind of things where the capacitor has been tacked onto the leg, which is then going to the tag board. I would just put new components in for all those. Also, in these amps, I have a preference for Mallory 150s over these orange drop caps. And again, that's just personal preference. I mean, if this were my own amp and I was just doing work on it, I'd probably go ahead and replace the filter caps as well and just rebuild basically this whole thing. But again, that's because the labor is free when I'm doing it, essentially. But this otherwise looks like a good amp. This tube socket is maybe not quite the right one, or not secured as well as it could. Could be. It actually looks like it's mounted correctly, so it might just be a socket that needs to be retensioned. So I'll check that out as well before handing back to the customer. But we're going to call it good on this guy. Again, this was just for an initial inspection and kind of to show you, again, if you're working on one of these vintage amps, don't go chopping them up. Don't do irreparable mods. There was a time when all of these Fenders were cheap and people just did whatever they wanted to them because you could get a silver face, or, there was a time where you could get a tweed for cheap. There was a time where you could get a black panel for cheap because people didn't want them. They wanted the newest thing, or they thought modeling amps were the next new thing, or rack gear or whatever. Somebody else wants that amp. I'm not a big fan of modding amps, especially irreparably, because if you don't like it, there's a good chance someone else does, and there's a good chance you could sell that amp, get something that you like a whole lot better. So, just an opinion, but good opportunity to take a look at an old 50s Fender and I guess throw some opinions out there into the internet, because there's not enough of those already. All right, hope you all are having a good day. We'll be back with another customer amp soon.